The Great Pokémon War has always been highly theorized about, but I'm about to solve over 3,000 years of history today. Pokémon used by opposing factions, forcing the King of Kalos AZ himself to give up his own Floette to fight. And when faced with Floette's mortality, AZ turned a machine of life into a harbinger of death, ending the war. But how did we get here? Because it is said in Lysandre's labs that Callos could not escape war with those that wanted its wealth. The power of infinity energy. I know what regions battled with Callos, I know who the descendants of the king are, and how it relates to the heroes of Unova, the original dragon, and the darkest day, even influencing modern day events. Howdy there, I'm Relic, and let's answer all of this and more through the use of the games, the anime, the manga, and even the Pokemon miniseries that occurs on YouTube. No place has been left unscavenged. I needed every little bit of information I could gather to solve all of this and more. So, instead of wasting time, let's just start with 3,000 years before modern times, as we have three major events that occurred. Starting with the war itself, the Great Pokemon War, we have information from Lysandre's labs that fill in information that AZ had told us directly. On the red shelves, we find the following scripture. The king's name was AZ. He was both the beginning and the end. He used technology unlike any seen during that era to unite Callos for the first time. The king was proud of the technology he had used to bring Callos prosperity, but he couldn't help but use it in a way that had never been intended. AZ, the man who was king, disappeared. When AZ, the man who was king, vanished, he took the key to the ultimate weapon. That is the item required to activate the weapon. Technology in the Pokemon world has always had an extra layer of futuristic tech to it. And while most people might say that Pokemon takes place in the future, instead it takes place in a similar timeline to our own. This is shown through the development of fossils that happen similarly to ones in real life. This can be exemplified through the understanding of Pokemon such as Anorith existing long before Pokemon such as Tyrantrum, as their real-life counterparts did the same. No, instead, what makes Pokemon so advanced in technology and have free healthcare is the idea of infinity energy. Something that was unheard of 3,000 years ago and would be the pinpoint of war and strife throughout the world. What is infinity energy, you ask? Well, it is simply the life force of a Pokemon. Bioenergy. It powers their life, their spirit, but also powers up their moves. It's why Pokemon watchers can study Pokemon moves and the strength of their output to tell the health of a Pokemon. If a lightning bolt is not as strong as it was yesterday, regardless of the effectiveness on the opposing Pokemon, there could be something wrong with your Pokemon and their infinity energy, their health. The problem, though, with this is that this can be harnessed externally, and we see this in the modern day with the Devon Corporation, amongst others that are attempting to do the same. Submarines, missiles, Pokemon centers, and so much more. In fact, without AZ, the modern day Devon Corporation would not have infinity energy, as Mr. Stone's grandfather researched that same energy to help people and Pokemon, while also becoming a multi-billion-dollar industry vital to the world of Pokemon, or at least Hoenn. And the only way to do so is to use Pokemon bioenergy in order to create infinity energy. You have to use Pokemon at the beginning. Their sins don't end there, but we'll get there in 3,000 years. Continuing with the purple shelves, the king couldn't escape war with those who targeted a wealthy Callos. The war grew so violent and ugly, the king was forced to send his own beloved Pokemon into battle. AZ had a younger brother. It's said that he led a legion of greedy souls who wanted to seize the Callos region. His dark intention was to make it his own, but when he saw how Callos had been ravaged by the war, he took the weapon his brother had created, and he buried the weapon deep underground. The king's younger brother told his progeny the location of the ultimate weapon and died. That is something to be used by sophisticated powers, not humans. Human beings must create a world where such a weapon is unnecessary. Here we are told of entire regions that want the power of Kalos. Not other kingdoms within Kalos, entire regions. We already know that Kanto, Johto, Sinnoh, and Hoenn, said that in the wrong order, are close together. Meanwhile, Unova is the first place that requires extensive effort to get to in the past, as in the modern day, it takes seafaring vessels and even airplanes to travel to it. If we look at the main games, in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, Professor Oak explains that Sinnoh, Kanto, and Hoenn are part of a larger country whose name has yet to be revealed. This concept is similar to the regions of Japan, which the Pokemon world has been modeled after, and from which the Pokemon world's Kanto region takes its name. Unova, Kalos, Alola, Galar, and Paldea are known to be located far away from Kanto and Johto, and as such may not be a part of this country. Additionally, Kitakami is stated to be in the east. Melee City, in the Alola region, was built by people who previously lived in Kanto and Johto, and is also stated to have eastern influence. The midway between Johto and Sinnoh/Hisui lies the Sinjo Ruins, being described as an entire location in Old Verse 12 of Pokemon Legends Arceus. In addition, the modern-day Blueberry Academy, located in Unova, has a terrarium that contains 4 different biomes based on different regions and locations. The coastal biome in particular is based on environments and ecosystems located in Alola, allowing Alolan Pokemon to, of course, thrive there. Now, all of this doesn't give us a perfect idea of who is involved with the Great War, but it does tell us who is not involved. Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, and Sinnoh. This is due to resources and distance. How are you going to know about these places if you do not travel the long distance between them? War is expensive in resources, in time, in money. As such, having a war from such a long distance would be incredibly costly, to the point of putting your own country, your own kingdom, your region into a precarious situation that could cause it to crumble. Now, those that might be involved in the Great War, of course, include Kalos, Unova, Galar, and Paldea. Though Alola might be ruled out because of the information we have regarding individuals that settled there from Johto and Kanto, but not from any other region. So it sits as a maybe it is not involved for now. We will explore additional information that could rule it out completely. We also get the mention of AZ having a younger brother who died after the war. Is it too late to send flowers? But not before having children. So we'll get to the progenitors later on. For now, we have to understand that AZ's unnamed brother led a legion of greedy individuals to seize the power of Kalos, and only stopped after he witnessed the destruction of war itself. Now, this could be, again, from outside of Kalos, but I would also like to believe that it could be from within Kalos. More specifically, in areas where AZ's brother would have been protected from the war, within the deeper walls. A legion itself is usually comprised of roughly 5,000 soldiers. It changes depending on where you look in history, and Kalos being an entire region could easily support that. And what his brother committed was a coup. It's no different than stories involving individuals such as Romulus and Remus. Romulus and Remus existed in Roman times according to myth and had disagreed on where to build Rome. And it was Romulus who had killed his own brother in anger after witnessing him jump over the wall repeatedly, seeing it as a bad omen. I kind of imagine it's not a massive wall, it's just a little wall that he kept just partially jumping over, and he's just like, alright, no, I'm not doing this. Though in Kalos, with constant strife, the brother may have seen this as a weakness, using his opportunity to talk to people who have never seen war but are ready to fight anyway. They stood up from deep within the city walls where they were most safe, and were preparing to venture towards where his brother was, doing something unknown to the world at the time as they approached Kalos Center. Remember, greed does come in many forms: money, fame, power, resources, and more. His brother could have simply wanted to take over all that there was, use the power of Kalos, and control the world itself. We may never know. Now, before we continue, as we are going to start getting really deep into all of the mud here, I just want to say thank you so much for watching. If you love this so far, please support the channel any way you can. Subscribe, share the video with others, watch the other videos here, as I do deep dives all the time. And if you want to go the extra mile, you can always become a member of the channel to view videos early, see behind the scenes stuff, and get some exclusive voting. So, as always, thank you so much for watching, and let's continue with the video. What we do know is that once AZ fired the ultimate weapon, it amounted to destruction beyond imagination. It held the power of infinite energy, the raw might of hundreds, if not thousands, of Pokemon in their entirety, turning them to stone as they are deprived of life. A single Pokemon move, I want you to remember, can destroy buildings, even cities, with the right Pokemon. Humanity cannot fathom what the sheer unchecked power that the ultimate weapon had. And it was the mathematical genius of AZ that allowed him to create this weapon and fire it without backfiring. Mind you, it wasn't meant to be a weapon. It was an item, a machine meant to give life. And he transformed it into this thing. And he did so, theoretically, within a year of Eternal Floette's death. Now, the younger brother, seeing the unspeakable, helped bury the weapon as he tried to speak with his brother, wrote these documents, and passed them on to his next of kin before he passed. Though when he spoke to his brother, AZ said the following, as we look to the blue shelves. Full of sorrow, AZ built the ultimate weapon. When he did this, he left the following words. What's wrong with bringing something you love back into this world? Without my beloved Pokemon, no other Pokemon have any meaning. The mountains will never know one another, but people can encounter other people, and people and Pokemon mixed together. These were the final words that he stated as he brought the war to a close, but not before he began to wander this world alone for thousands of years. Not yet. It is here, though, that Eternal Floette, seeing what AZ had done, that he had to take countless lives in order to bring Floette back to life, and then he proceeded to take the lives of more, that Floette left. It having an eternal life of its own. We'll come back to AZ later as we get the finality of these documents. Over the ages, people and Pokemon worked alongside one another and created many things. As a result of this, a leader appeared among the humans. The leader sought to produce even more goods. Increased production of goods created a gap between haves and have-nots, the rich and the poor. And yet these documents stand within the possession of a man with power and success, similar to that of AZ, but with the mentality of his brother. Information was lost over the years, individuals realizing it should be a myth. The best way to keep something buried is to erase the location of it. And so, despite being a descendant of AZ's brother, Lysandre had to search for where the ultimate weapon was hidden. And that we will come back to later as well. Now, as we look at the image that is the only one showing actual war happening, we see a slew of Pokemon here. And this could be very relevant to who our opposing forces are. Are they two different forces battling each other as they come to Kalos, or is Kalos depicted here in the battle? We will be considering, once again, Unova, Kalos, Alola, Galar, and Paldea for either side or both sides. This very well could tell us even more as to what the situation of the past world was before we get into other noted major events through the timeline. So let's break this down, because on the left we see Gyarados, which Magikarp is not naturally found in Unova except under Marvelous Bridge. They come from the Nature Sanctuary or Nature Reserve, meaning they are not native, and they are based on Asian carp, so that's no surprise, actually. Lunatone and Solrock, while Hoenn likes to think that they appeared 40 years ago for the first time, we can blatantly see that this is incorrect. And don't say, oh, then the war happened 40 years ago. Do you think Cynthia would let that happen? She would love this stuff! And they can't be found in Paldea, so that knocks out Paldea. Hoenn is also not found in Paldea, although I have horrid speculations that Hoenn might have been a big reason why a number of different wars could have occurred, since their line can control people and minds and everything like that, but we have no evidence of that because, it likely got rid of all the documentation of it, but whatever. Talonflame is in all of the named regions. Steelix can be reduced to Onyx, as I would assume our forces are smart enough to use metal coats based on the fact of what gear they are wearing in the image, meaning that this Pokemon can be found in all the regions and utilized. Salamence is here, as Bagon is in all of the regions. Rhyperior breaks down to Rhyhorn, which is not native to Unova, being only found in the White Forest, which that's a mess in and of itself, so that means that it's, again, not in Unova. Golurk means Golette, which means its cannon transforming self is not in Alola unless it is an SOS battle, though it is built by an ancient civilization. It's like clay pottery. It could be theoretically found anywhere that had an excess amount of clay and could harness infinity energy because it's a perpetual motion machine fueled by something unknown, which we can suspect is infinity energy, and a little bit more, which we'll mention a little bit more later. This leaves us with the left side only having two possibilities, Galar and Callos. So let's look at the other side before we do any assumptions here. With the right side, Weavile breaks down to Sneasel, available in all relevant locations. Abomasnow Snover, not found in Unova or Alola. Noivern is not in Unova. Magnemite is not in Unova, Kalos, or Galar. Bisharp is down to Poniard, which is not found in Alola unless it's an SOS battle. And Agra is down to Aeron, not in Unova, Alola, Galar, or Aldea. What? So you're telling me that there are no possibilities for any of our relevant regions? And it's not like the other regions currently have the energy or resources, or even the Pokemon to go this far, as we discussed. So, if we ignore Magnemite, then it would either have to be Kalos or Paldea. Realistically speaking, we do see a banner being shown on the right side here. History is written by those that stand on top of the pile, and as such, history would be written by Kalos, while others may try to hide their failures. We can safely assume that the right side could be Kalos, while the left side would be Galar. There is, of course, the chance that both sides are Kalos, but then you would expect a banner on both sides showing the internal strife, the civil war occurring within the greater war. But why would Galar be involved here? Well, that brings us to one of our other major events that occurred 3,000 years ago, the original Darkest Day. Eternatus rises from the maxed lair that it had been residing within after it had crash-landed in Galar thousands of years ago. And it rises into the sky. It attempts to stay alive by absorbing Galar's energy, recovering its true form, causing a red light to appear, and causing the Darkest Day over the Galar region to occur. Alternatively nicknamed the Black Night, a massive storm would blot out the sun and cover Galar in sheer darkness. While this happened, Eternatus would transform into Eternamax and rampage, destroying everything as it continued to draw power from the particles it lost upon crashing into the Galar region. The particles simply being named Wishing Stars. Now, while it says nothing about all the other regions being covered in darkness, no other region also talks about when weather goes absolutely insane, when Kyogre and Groudon clash, or when Rayquaza appears, or, again in this case, a dragon in its true form that expands into space that cannot be missed. You just have to look up, or your head's stuck looking straight forward. Either way, either people are blind, or they chalk it up to the gods doing something, or records are being destroyed. Oh wait, that's exactly what Swordbird and Shieldbird did with the assistance of Chairman Rose. Yeah, that happens in the Adventures manga because they wanted to be the heroes, and they failed. Horribly. Like they deserve. Now, the Darkest Day was eventually ended by two heroes that came forth alongside the assistance of Zacian and Zamazenta to defeat Eternamax, putting it back into slumber. But there's a problem here. You could assume the particles just defy logic, and after Eternamax is defeated, then it all just disappears. Well, you could assume that the particles don't have to fall back down to the planet, but that's what they did. And we know that for a fact because it also happens again in the modern day. It's also how the the layers are made where you fight all of your Dynamax and Gigantamax Pokemon. I get it, Gigantamax, let me say it the way I want to. But what does this even mean? Well, it means that this would be no different than the meteor that kickstarted the end of the dinosaurs, because when the sky is blotted out by that many particles, it takes time for the sky to clear, meaning that your home is not receiving enough light. Your plants struggle. Herbivores cannot get their food, which means they begin to die out, followed up by the carnivores. Sea life dies more as well, resulting in more decay. A harsh environment follows suit as all creatures are in a kill or be killed world. Coughing becomes its Galar form as there's so much pollution that osmosis to get rid of poison isn't going to work. As such, it has to absorb and purify, adapting to a worse environment rather than creating a worse environment. The Zigzagoon line, being known to have come out on top because of the harsh environment, gets its third form as they are originally from this region, and Corsola loses color, becoming Cursula, a dead coral, and so much more. Now, before we do go further, it is important to understand that we do not have precise time intervals. We go from 3.5 thousand to 2.5 to 1, and because of this, I've decided that these are going to be similar to eras, only changed or noted to be a new year based on major events. This is something that we do when we look at the ages of dinosaurs even. Sometimes there's nothing major that happens, we just need to organize it. Though many major events did occur 3,000 years ago, it is up to us to understand what our cause and effects are based on the noted history we have. And if we are rightfully to assume that Galar began an age in which they struggled to survive for resources, for energy, as they do in the modern day even, then war was inevitable. Especially if you're stuck staring at another region that has harnessed technology to make them prosperous in all fields. And so you prepare with what little resources you have, and as the King of Galar, you declare war on Kalos, beginning the Great War. Or at least being a part of it. We know for a fact the Great War is worldwide. Otherwise, so many Pokemon would not be involved. Such a large destructive device would probably not be involved because it shoots into space and then crashes back down. But we have one other major event occurring within the world that may influence war as we turn our heads to one other possible participant within the Great War. The final major event that occurred 3,000 years ago, as two brothers fought over truth and ideals, concepts within our minds that belong to a higher singular deity, as the unnamed original dragon split into Zekrom and Reshiram, the leftover energy creating a third, originally thought to be from space, but known to have been born from this splitting, as Kyurem also came into existence, the Tau Trio. Now, there are a lot of theories that come in here that also draw some very interesting connections between the heroes of Kalos and AZ, and I will address these alternative arguments as they come up, as well as others along the line. The first of which, though, is that AZ and Ghetsis from the modern day were the original heroes after the events of the Great War. The idea was supported over the idea of AZ having a younger, greedier brother. There are two things that go against this. One being the aforementioned death of his brother, the other being that Ghetsis himself states that he could never be the hero, and that is why he had to adopt N. The idea was that he wanted to make N become the hero, and N in turn tells us to inherit the title of the hero as the protagonist of the game. This is incredibly important, as it means that you don't need to be descendants of the heroes in order to be the hero. It is a title that is inherited, not a birthright. In other words, this also cuts out the Getsis, whatever, is immortal theory. More on all of that later, as this all becomes incredibly important, and yes, we will talk about who the descendants of AZ is. Back to our heroes of Unova though. Now I've consulted others that have been pointed towards other theories, and as such, I am drawing information I found to be aligned with what I believe to be the most logical from those sources, such as the Infinity Energy files. The original dragon was capable of distinguishing truth from ideals, something that would be the fit of a true god. The god was being consulted by the heroes before it would split. The brothers would argue and even battle before realizing that neither side was right or wrong and that they should cease their battles. One brother built what would eventually become the Abyssal Ruins. So, bear with me as we talk about intricate details that are key in tying together Unova to Callos, and what would help explain some modern day information when we get to it. In these ruins, we get descriptions regarding our king alongside symbols that are relatively understood. The king defeated humans alone. That symbol looks relatively similar to a fleur de lis, which is what the ultimate weapon is similar to itself and what Lysandre is named after. The next symbol looks similar to a broken Tau symbol, otherwise known as the yin and yang. This would represent Reshiram and Zekrom, saying that they joined the king in a day. King called Pokémon beings, and originally, to explain that, Pokémon were just seen as tools, not conscious beings, and in reality, humanity was not much better. We used to think that cats, dogs, and every other animal did not have a conscience. They were machines in some weird form, bio-machines that just existed to do what we wanted them to do, because they couldn't think like we thought, so they clearly aren't conscious, and we know that that is not the case. Now, the king decided that Pokemon are beings. This would line up with AZ's pained words after firing the ultimate weapon. King is hope and future. And finally, the great King Harmonia, the last name of both N and Getsis. Natural Harmonia, Gropius, and Getsis Harmonia. Now, this is where most people would claim the aforementioned theory of Getsis being a brother to AZ, because there are far too many coincidences, but allow me to throw my own theory out into the ring. The original heroes of Unova witnessed the power of the ultimate weapon from afar. They, having agreed that one is no better than the other, rode upon Reshiram and Zekrom immediately to investigate further. Then, after witnessing the wanton destruction that was laid before them, they found that AZ was the balance between truth and ideals. AZ's ideal was to live with his Floette happily in a world where his technology would thrive and people could live. But when faced with truth, he did not give up those ideals, but rather adjusted to the truth before him and struck back at the world. This can be supported by even N stating how the balance between truth and ideal is found within the player character within the games of Black and White, and how Getsis apparently sees this as a good thing. This would make it so that our two heroes, who could not see each other's side but simply accepted it, would look upon AZ in reverence and sit before the king that had decided to defeat all of humanity alone, put an end to the war, and bring out peace and harmony. Because a war does not simply end in a day, there are always people who keep attacking and pushing on, those who act in opposition, and information itself does not pass by as quickly then as it does now. And so, the king was given the title of Great King Harmonia. This last name would not be passed on to the next of kin, as this was not AZ's true name, but rather a nickname given by the heroes, and a last name that would be passed down from themselves through time as Unova and Callos would form an alliance. And you may have a bunch of questions regarding that, and I will answer those later. Just hold on to that. Sentries were created to protect the kingdom, as Golett and Golurk were formed as ground sentinels. The infinity energy residue left behind now being formed together, amalgamations of souls from other Pokemon being reformed into a new Pokemon, that is seen as a Pokemon, not just as a golem, something that could be caught within a Pokeball, something that can still evolve. The sky grew in color and form as an aerial defense was created through the power of Sigilyph, a psychic type that also showed art and intelligence in its design and typing. And as infinity energy was buried, hidden away, coal would become the primary source of energy once more as the coal-eating Torkoal was uncovered within mines. All three actually being Pokemon that AZ has when you fight him in Pokemon X and Y. All three also representing longevity. And even more specifically, his Galar, representing not only ancient civilizations, same as Sigilyph through their Pokédex, but Galar itself represents perpetual motion, another form of infinite energy. And once again, making AZ out to be just an absolute genius, especially for his time. He may have actually taught what he knew in order to keep harmony amongst humans, even if he did so begrudgingly, because we know he is smart enough to know what must be done, face the truth while handling one's own ideals. The perfect balance. The problem with an alliance that relies solely on one individual, as we've seen in our own reality, is that when AZ leaves, it opens up a hole of power. He has no intention of staying if it means that he doesn't get to be with his Floette. Upon his departure, the brothers would have their own children, who would fight and squabble alongside the power of Reshiram and Zekrom. They were never named heroes, though unlike their fathers, their battles would tear Unova apart, leaving nothing behind but ash after fire and lightning have reduced their world to nothing. That is why Reshiram and Zekrom, in their entries and in their myth, states that they would burn the world to nothing, because they already did so to Unova. But this isn't the end of the family line, nor is it the end of the Great War, because the story lives on in new battles, in new people, and in new stories as we move to the new era 2.5 thousand years ago. It is stated that the Relic Castle is created at this time by one of the heroes. The problem with this, though, is that I don't know who the heroes are anymore. Are they the descendants of the original brothers, or are they a totally new person altogether? We won't know for sure until Pokemon confirms it, but I would like to think of it like this. Based on, once again, the information regarding Ghetsis, N, and our player character. The hero does not have to be in blood relation to the original heroes. Ghetsis knew he could not become a hero, but we know he is a descendant. This is because of the sheer amount of wealth he has, the secrecy in which he kept everything, including that wealth, the grunts who are loyal to him, and the ability to gather the 7 sages who are said to be some of the most intelligent people in the world, though I gotta admit, the sages act more like the alpha bros that you see online spouting philosophy randomly as if it means anything. This all comes to a head as Ghetsis very clearly understands the history of the ancient heroes better than anybody else. Because while he is a descendant, it is what one of these 7 sages, Zinzalin, states that tells us even more about our trio here. According to Zinzalin, N has traits that would have belonged to the good king, suspecting that the traits of the king translated down the line to all of his descendants. N is known to be able to talk to his Pokemon. His awkwardness, hairstyle, and understanding of Pokemon held so much weight that people thought N was a Zoroark, or a child of one. Mainly because of what happened in the games, though despite all these ideas, I say objection! N was adopted alongside 2 others, Anthea and Concordia, all with the purpose of taking individuals with incredibly high emotional understanding and connections to Pokemon and turning them into the next hero. These 3 grew to eventually understand this, and they even say how N somehow seemed to have the most potential according to Ghetsis. The adoptive sisters cared for him, and through all 3 of their stories, which divulge some heinous details about Ghetsis, not a single one points towards the idea of N being a Zoroark. Your next claim is, then why did Ghetsis call N a freak without a human heart so many times? It is simply because N understood Pokemon, could speak to them, and Ghetsis found it appalling, disgusting, despicable. So much so that with the strength of his own ideals, he could not accept that N was human, that it was truly possible to speak to Pokemon, and as such, N was nothing more than a freak. We know Ghetsis follows his own ideals strongly, though these ideals are so incredibly twisted. This is supported as when he conducted a ritual with N to call upon Reshiram. Reshiram rejected him and N, all as Ghetsis questioned, "Are we not worthy?" As we look to other forms of media, we see that N is actually paired with Zekrom, the personification of ideals. This is because Ghetsis instilled into N his own ideals, and from there, N twisted it even further, not understanding what the ideals truly were, thinking that it was simply the truth. This is why Reshiram rejected N. He was not full of truth. He was not following his truth. He was following ideals. And he was following someone else's ideals. Something that could not be recognized to be a trait of a true hero. And so, Reshiram attacked, rejecting N and Ghetsis in that moment. Because despite Zekrom being the personification of ideals, or Pokemonification of ideals, we know that N is very logical. Truth is what the end of a formula should bring. Every encounter we end up with N, he talks about logic or formulas, sitting in awe at the architecture and mathematics that are required in order to construct a Ferris wheel, and struggling to even comprehend anything that he cannot figure out a formula to or predict. I mean, come on. He literally has a Rubik's Cube hanging off him. Those are like the epitome of making someone look smart. Now, I mean, personally, I do all this research and reading and analysis, and yet I have yet to ever complete a Rubik's Cube. Take that as you will. Now, I will state that another argument may be that the brothers did have a father who in turn was king. This does not mean, though, that he was dethroned, but rather AZ was the greater king, the great King Harmonia. It's like having the throne of a world leader rather than just a regional king. There's layers and tiers to it. This could tell us something that we otherwise would not have seen. It took me a long time to wrap my head around. N is a descendant of AZ. AZ was never directly stated to understand Pokemon, though there are many cases in the anime and game where we might see people who state through their bonds they can fully understand their partner Pokemon at the least. I mean, Ash from the first couple of episodes of the anime flat out says, what, you can't understand the Pokemon? I can. I can understand exactly what my Pokemon are saying. Now, don't get me wrong, this could be dramatized regarding AZ, changed over the years, or even be a direct truth as we attach Zinzalin's sayings to N and open the very possible outcome that N is a descendant of AZ, not of the heroes, which would explain why N was told he could inherit the title of the heroes of the past if Reshiram or Zekrom recognizes N as a hero. Though more aptly, let's look at the legend of Reshiram. When a person appears who is searching deeply for the truth, Reshiram will appear. At first, Reshiram will battle with that person as a test of their strength and heart, and if it decides that person is a hero, it will pass on the wisdom it has accumulated over thousands of years and then bare its fangs against the hero's enemies. From that point on, Reshiram will treat the hero with kindness, as a parent would treat a child. But although the person called the hero will be able to attain great riches and power, the goodness in their heart will be lost, and the country built by the hero will be consumed in flames. Then, Reshiram will depart. Despite all of that, despite being a person of logic, N was following his ideals. The liberation of Pokemon, or at least, by the end of it all, the happiness of Pokemon and people together. This is the fate of mankind, human nature. It is fate to some capacity that we would take what God grants us and abuse the power bestowed. It is done with infinity energy, it is done with all resources, and this is a tale that follows the story of alchemy. The two contraries are a pair of dragons in alchemy named Sophic Mercury and Sophic Sulfur. They are commonly depicted as a white, fluffy dragon with 2 wings and a black, scaly dragon with 4 limbs. These depictions heavily informed the body designs of Reshiram and Zekrom. Sophic Mercury is described as active and Sophic Sulfur as passive, which could be a loose inspiration for the truth and ideals that Reshiram and Zekrom represent. The two contraries fight because they are opposites, yet they complete each other, similarly to the concept of yin and yang. The two contraries are also what allow free will and awareness to exist, reflected in Pokemon by the choice between truth and ideals. Sophic Sulfur's name and corresponding element could be an inspiration for Reshiram being fire-type. In addition, the 3 essentials, Mercury, Sulfur, and Salt, the elements needed to create a Philosopher's Stone, are considered the child of the two contraries. When the essentials and contraries are merged, they become a 3-headed dragon. This could be the basis for the original dragon, which split into Reshiram, Zekrom, and Kyurem long ago. The process of fusing requires the presence of Sophic Salt to freeze the two contraries together and ground them. This could be the inspiration for Kyurem being an ice type. The Philosopher's Stone is immortality. Immortality is what infinity energy brings, and what AZ had gained as he continued to grow even in his adult age. The Philosopher's Stone is what the heroes would bow down to, as it is the culmination of their being, their kingdom, and the dragons that made them who they are. Alchemy even seems to be what gets us attempts in order to summon Reshiram in the anime. It truly is just one big attaching circle. So, all of this was just to prove that the heroes are literally no different than, I guess, Link from The Legend of Zelda, as the hero simply appears when needed and can be anyone. This makes the timeline much easier, as the only hiccup was simply how Relic Castle was built by one of the heroes. To also be fair, it does state that it was actually built by one of the ancient kings, so it is vague and people might assume it was the OGs. Relic Castle was the heart of a civilization for people and Pokemon in the region. As time went by, the city was buried in the sand. Meanwhile, the abyssal ruins were counter to that, stating that they are what remains of an ancient city built by one of the ancient kings of Unova and his respective legendary dragon about 3,000 years ago. At some point, the city was sunk to the bottom of the sea by a tsunami. However, the king saved all from the waves. After the king's death, the city became his resting place. It says nothing about Pokemon other than the king's legendary dragon. This would mean that somewhere between 3,000 years ago and 2,500 years ago, there was a shift in thought. There was a change in how people saw Pokemon, and it was by the time that the Relic Castle was created that we see people and Pokemon living equally in harmony, at least regarding the kings from Unova. Okay, so this is several days after my original recording, and I didn't get to start editing because holidays, fantastic, and you know, I have special guest Whiskey here who I can't kick out of the room because he never is in the room or is on any videos whatsoever, so say hi to the camera, Whiskey. Or not. Either way, the idea here is this is completely unscripted, but the reason why I am doing this extra little bit of recording is because I realized that the Swords of Justice and their part in the war was never actually stated as to when it happened. I thought for some reason there was an extra war that happened 300 years ago prior to the main event of Pokemon Black and White. Turns out that that was incorrect, and I wasn't going to include this initially, and then I started to think more and more and more over the days and started to pull my hair out because I realized what this means, and that is simply the idea that when people who love Pokemon and people who didn't think Pokemon were anything but tools actually ended up fighting against each other in a civil war. We know that it was a human-human war,
and that it ended up hurting Pokemon along the way. As such, we can assume that between the, 3,000 year ago age and the 2,500 years ago age, that a civil war broke out that then garnered Pokemon to have, I guess, rights. Wow, that gets really dark really fast when you think about it that way. But nevertheless, to stop treating Pokemon as tools and create laws in favor of Pokemon. The reason I place it here is because it would also line up incredibly well with the Abyssal Ruins versus the Relic Castle, and the idea that Pokemons were not... Oh my gosh, I sounded like an old lady or somebody who doesn't know Pokemon whatsoever when I said Pokemons by accident. But either way, so the idea here, once again, is that 3,000 years ago, Pokemon were considered tools, Civil War happened, and then 2,500 years ago, that is when people and Pokemon were living together. Alternatively, the war could happen at any other point, but I think it makes perfect sense for it to occur here, where it is undated history, or unspecified dated history. If you don't know what the war was, it is an unnamed civil war, from the sounds of it, that again occurred between humans and humans. This ended up displacing a lot of Pokemon along the way, ruining habitats, homes, and these Swords of Justice decided to rise up with the help of other Pokemon, guiding them as they then took part as a third faction within this war. They are very distrustful of humans, but that does not mean that they would not have relatively sided with the humans that would be treating them better. The problem really occurred when on the Moor of Icarus, a fire broke out and they had to save tons of Pokemon, including Keldeo, who had been separated from its parents. Which means that there are more Keldeo out there somewhere, somehow, and we don't know what the parents look like. That means that Keldeo, there's a chance that Keldeo could be fully grown already, or there's also the chance that Keldeo is just the child. Ultimately, though, the trio served to fight back against the armies, not just army, but fight back against the armies and would rise up again if Pokemon were ever threatened or mistreated in this way ever again, in order to preserve peace and the environment itself. They're basically the Rayquaza of humans within the Unova region, if that makes any sense.
One more thing I'd like to include for my own sake, as I'm in the middle of editing now, is the fact that Ghetsis, he is not a demon, although, I kind of wish he was. He's just a twisted human being. He did not sacrifice his arm, he did not sacrifice his eye, those are just simply on his body still. We actually can see, looking at concept art, or looking at other pieces of information or media that has had him included, that he has both arms. One is just simply tucked behind his back at all times, and the only time he reveals it is when he's crowning N as the king. He also keeps his one eye covered, and behind that eye in the concept art, we can see a funny little symbol there. That symbol is the Greek symbol for alpha. First, it also represents dominance, control, the idea of being above others, the progenitor of all. And what does Ghetsis want? He wants to dominate. He wants to rule the world. And alpha represents literally the number 1. One eye, one arm, and when he reveals that arm, it's covered. It is just a moment of showing weakness without actually being weak in his own mind, covering it up and allowing himself the secrecy within even his own mind to reach the new heights he is so desperate for, his own ideals. In the Relic Castle are fossils. The Stone of Reshiram is found here in the manga by Clay, though none of them are the relics that we find in the Abyssal Ruins, such as the crown or bands. This really doesn't mean much other than the fact that the original reliquaries of the king were lost in the Abyssal Ruins and could not be brought here by survivors. In the Relic Castle, we do find Yamask, Sandile, their evolutions, Sandslash, Onyx, Baltoy, and Claydol. all Pokemon that insinuate an ancient world, or at least can dig, as it was said that this was a place that was buried in the sand and it had to be excavated properly or nobody could enter. These Pokemon would be the exception. For Yamask, it carries the face it had as a human long ago in the form of a mask. Wearing the mask will cause you to be possessed, though it does not actively wish to possess people. The same mask can be seen crying at times, and it is known to wander ancient civilizations. Meanwhile, Cofagrigus kinda has just lived for too long and lost who they are mentally, becoming a bit more of a menace. Though, you don't have to worry as long as you don't try to loot any of the valuables, and it won't turn you into a mummy. Now, when we look at Claydol, it is only found in the most ancient of civilizations, while Baltoy does not always follow that pattern. Claydol is found in Sky Pillar back in Hoenn, here in Relic Castle, and I guess a number of places within Galar. Though they are rare at least and seem to only appear more on foggier days, which is kind of mysterious. Though we know Galar is a place of old castles and all, and as a small side note, I have my ecology series for Pokemon where I explain why every Pokemon is on every route and how the food chains work and how they relate to their environment and each other, and I can already tell Galar's going to be a headache. Ultimately though, these Pokemon serve two purposes. To show that people of the ancient civilization were intelligent enough to create Baltoy and Claydol as sentries. These sentries, specifically Baltoy found deeper in the floors, are known to cry out at night, likely in sorrow for what is no longer here. Meanwhile, Yamask, I had to say it once to satiate you, alongside the assistance of two very special Pokemon here, tells us a much darker tale. Remember when I said the sky takes a very long time to clear from ash? Well, it could take hundreds of years with the right amount of ash. We don't know exactly when Relic Castle was buried, but we do know the age of some Pokemon that went into Zen mode, with Darmanitan here confirmed to be over 2.5 thousand years old. Our monkeys that represent see no evil, hear no evil, and speak no evil. In addition to them, we have the very highly worshipped and arguably one of my favorite bug-type Pokemon of all time, Volcarona, the Sun God. Volcarona releases burning scales from its wings to engulf the battlefield in a sea of fire. Its flames are said to provide a replacement for the sun when the atmosphere is dark with volcanic ash. And some legends claim that it hatched from a cocoon of raging flames to save people and Pokemon in freezing climates. It was feared as the rage of the sun by ancient people, and it was even worshipped as a deity of fire in some places. They even referred to it as the embodiment of the sun. Volcarona's shrine in Relic Castle remains as a testament to the respect it commanded. Despite being worshipped in cold regions, it is unpopular in hot regions due to its burning body, and it is considered dangerous due to how it scatters hot burning scales, which can rob the surrounding air of its oxygen. So, with the basis for our knowledge 2.5 thousand years ago, are you ready to find out why Relic Castle was buried? Because in the New Age, 2,000 years ago, Hoenn was plagued by meteor showers that created the new home place of the Draconid people, Meteor Falls. The lands overflowed with natural energy, and so Primo Groudon and Primo Kyogre awakened and fought. It is distinctly stated that they ravaged the Earth, not just Hoenn, and were only defeated and put to slumber by Rayquaza after the Draconid summoned it through a wish on a meteor. The people of Hoenn then began to revere Rayquaza as their savior. The sheer power that these Pokemon held within them had shaped the planet. But when they clash, they will destroy all that they were the architects of. Nobody is safe. And when Groudon continues to shape the earth, create explosions of lava and ash, polluting the skies as a volcano would 1,000 times over, the world will return to darkness once more. The people of Relic Castle have heard stories of this, stories of when the sky turned black and how the kingdom of Galar struggled within their cold world devoid of sunlight. The people of Relic Castle were intelligent. They had found an answer to prepare for this future in Volcarona. And so, to protect themselves from harm, they closed the doors to Relic Castle, keeping soot and ash at their doorstep, an uninvited guest forced to stay out for now. But unfortunately, these people were doomed from the start. The world grew cold as the ash from after the battle had settled. Plants struggled to thrive once more. Some places hurt more than others, and the lands around Relic Castle turned from dirt to sand as the winds of the world whipped through the soil. Soil that is no longer protected by the roots of plants. The Darmanitan enter Zen mode, protecting themselves, an ability that only the ancient ones have, and a very rare modern Darmanitan may carry as a descendant. The terrain would eventually become a desert, the world growing ever so cold, especially at night, and bury the story of what happened inside the castle. Because it was not the burying of the castle that ended the lives of the people inside, it was Volcarona. They depended on it for warmth, though it is said that its burning scales can rob the surrounding area of oxygen, meaning the people of Relic Castle likely suffocated. No other creature could have survived this unless they could dig out as sand began to blow in more and more, filling the castle. And so, this is why we find no other Pokemon living here than the ones we speak about. Those that can dig, and those that can breathe. A traumatic fate that would bring tears to the mask of Yamask for eternity. We make another massive jump at this point. And some point in time undetermined, Dragonspiral Tower is created, bearing dragons even go-led amongst many wandering Pokemon outside. This is where Reshiram and Zekrom appear if not caught at End's castle. This is where they are said to be created and slumber. No one knows the history of it, but it is said to be the oldest in Unova. Despite me placing it here in the timeline, it does not actually belong here, and it is incredibly important to understand it and recognize it after everything we have discussed. Dragonspiral Tower seems to change a little bit between versions, whether it's the anime, the manga, the games, or whatever else. But what seems to be commonplace is how they seem to look like a form of castle. It even has a moat surrounding it to protect it. So why is it here? This is where the first kingdom was, where the one dragon existed, where it was respected and sought after. It would explain why other dragon types come here as well, but are not in Abyssal Ruins or Relic Castle. It would explain why this is where they are created and slumber, because they were created when the one dragon separated. As such, the dragons would return here and convert to their dormant states, waiting for the next heroes to arrive. Though Fate had other ideas, as their stones were separated before Relic Castle was buried. Now we continue in time, empires rise and fall, Galar is in a struggle for resources, Callos no longer has a king, Unova is rebuilding, all while the Paldean Empire forms and spends all of its resources as it ushers in a great age of exploration as they go into Area Zero, or like the crater of Area Zero, and yeah, that kind of depletes a lot of their resources for them, so I don't know, they could have joined the war at some point, but there's something weird with Paldea that seems to not exist regarding war, especially as they seem to be more about their own architecture, their ability to teach others, and to hold that history strongly. Of course, if you ignore the many crimes of the 4 Pokemon of Ruin, which come from another land. So, maybe one day we'll learn about that land, otherwise it's not relevant here. And I might have to redo this whole Pokemon Great War thing when we finally find out what region they belong to. Now, further ahead, 1500 years before the modern day, the ruins of Alph, Tanabe ruins, and Salacion ruins are discovered, uncovering the earliest known systems of writing and the unknown Pokemon. And the far-fetched line kind of diminishes in population due to overhunting. Just a fun little thing to throw in. We reach 1,000 years ago, and we have a massive meteor filled to the brim with primal energy that strikes Hoenn, creating what would eventually become Sutopolis.
Sensing the energy now overflowing throughout the lands, our primal friends awaken once more to gather the energy for themselves and return to their true primal forms. AZ arrives in Hoenn, broken, lost, but searching eternally for salvation of his soul and the eternal Floette. He stares up at the sky and witnesses the shaping of history. The people of Hoenn, more so the Draconins, themselves pray and wish to the sky for the return of Rayquaza to save them once more. And with the power of their wish, it did appear. It bore its mega form, defeated Primal Kyogre and Groudon, reverted them to their weakened states, and returned them to slumber. Sky Pillar was then built in Rayquaza's honor, and the Draconids put in the prophecy that this would occur every 1,000 years. But in the aftermath, AZ stood in realization of the world before him and stated, "It is the Delta, born of the great disturbances in this world, by the bonds born of mankind's wish and the power of the stones, it will calm the troubles that plague the world." AZ knew what had to be done. He knew that the raw infinity energy had to go somewhere, for it was infinite. It could neither be created nor destroyed, but rather recycled into the world. No, the universe itself. And so it crystallized and took the form of evolution stones and mega stones. These stones harnessed power beyond what is natural. They bear the energy of Pokemon new and old. They are a testament to AZ's crime against nature, born of the great disturbances in the world. But it is the Delta, Rayquaza itself, that will garner this energy and be a savior time and time again, despite humanity's sins. After all, Rayquaza is inspired by the Quetzalcoatl, who helped create humanity by diving into hell, saving them, and giving them new mortal life on Earth. It then saved humanity multiple times. One example simply being when the humans called it down to help them get grain far too far for them to collect from the opposite side of the mountain, or else they would starve. Always remember, Rayquaza forgives you for your sins. But in all seriousness though, AZ sees Rayquaza as the opposite of what he had done. He took a machine meant to give life and made it into the ultimate weapon. That very weapon took the lives of many as it blew through the atmosphere, then eviscerated those that witnessed the power of the light of ruin. Though now, Rayquaza has taken that same energy and turned it back around to save humanity and Pokemon as it calms the troubles that plague the world. By the way, Light of Ruin is Eternal Floette's signature move, because even though you can't get Eternal Floette, it and its signature move are programmed into most of the mainline games, which brings us to one of our final points that connects our stories. AZ planted a tree at the Cave of Origin before he left, and the story of a giant man planting said tree goes down in history as told in Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, which I'm just going to shorten to Oris from here in. That tree grows, and in the modern era of Oris, we find Eternal Floette's flower there, waiting. Now, there are only two possibilities. Either they reunited and Floette left the flower, or Floette is waiting here as AZ continues to search for his answers. We know these are the only two possibilities because the flower that Floette has is otherwise extinct, with no exceptions. The answer lies within two individuals that set the timeline for us. So let's get into the Pokemon timeline and how confusing all of that is. Welcome to the final section as we are in the modern day of Pokemon. The first individual we will be looking at is actually a character I paid no attention to and refused to talk to as much as I could, Mr. Bonding. A man that is found in Oris, who is actually a nobody at the time. A man that is being taken in by Hoenn's old guys group as they wish to retire and pass on their knowledge and powers. This knowledge would transform Old Man Kizuna from a powerless man into Mr. Bonding, able to share all of the old powers. Or O powers, I guess that old O powers. But when is he able to share these powers? Within Pokemon X and Y, when you first meet him, he has all of the abilities available, and he shares them with you throughout the game. This makes ORAS occur before X and Y, but if you still don't believe me, we have a more prominent character residing within the International Police that give us double confirmation with a lot more footwork. Handsome, or should I say Looker, because yes, his actual direct translation name is Handsome, because it's not Looker because he's a detective, it's Looker because he looks good. He is vital as he has a partner Pokemon in Croagunk, in which he actually loses in battle, stating clearly that it passed away in the line of duty, or at least that he lost a Pokemon in the line of duty. In X and Y, he has an Esper as his partner Pokemon, and a photo of him and a creature that is described vaguely, which we could assume is a Croagunk. So, when did that Croagunk pass away? We don't need an exact date, we just need a generation, an estimation, and in the same series, when we see him and Esper in Pokemon Generations, we see him involved with an incident regarding a Heatran on a rampage after its Magma Stone was taken. This means that this event occurs in Generation 4, as we see Team Galactic is clearly involved and not disbanded. So, all we now need to do is confirm that ORAS occurs before Gen 4, or Sinnoh. Now, there are much simpler ways that I could have done this, as I went in circles, pulling my hair out, and my answer was actually a lot closer than I thought. So, you get to hear my journey in a much faster manner to confirm information on this timeline. We can state for sure that it occurs before the events of Gen 5 Unova, as the Royal Unova ship model is seen in ORAS, stating it will be a number of unknown years before it is complete. Though we can't continue to look at Looker because alternate timelines exist! Yay! Basically, he has amnesia in ORAS for an unknown reason, but is partnered back up with his superior Annabelle. They were on a team in the past investigating ultra wormholes which have sucked in multiple people, including their own teammate that was unnamed. Side note, Nanu was his former superior. So, there is a good chance Looker went through an ultra wormhole and ended up in a timeline in which ORAS occurs without any memories whatsoever, as what happened to a number of other characters who lose their memory just like Mon. Meanwhile, in Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon, he references Team Galactic and Team Plasma, as he states that Alola is a peaceful place and has no need to worry about people trying to create a new world or liberating Pokemon from their trainers. So this Looker clearly has his memories intact, and that at least tells us that Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon takes place in a timeline after Sinnoh and Unova. But this still tells us nothing about ORAS! Until we find one character that helped us cross the waters of Hoenn, because in the Lumiose Museum, there is a painting of Mr. Briny and Pico, his Wingull. In addition, a bug catcher tells the player that he heard that Pokemon centers used to have 2 stories until 10 years ago, and had a special area known as the Pokemon Cable Club. The last game to utilize this feature, Pokemon Emerald, was first released in 2004, 10 years before the remakes were released, just tying in the games to real life, 10 years. So, whatever. We have multiple confirmations showing that ORAS should occur before the events of X and Y. I feel like I got lost in the sauce there. And all of it was just to show that Eternal Floette did not leave its flower under the tree after reuniting with AZ. From here, the main events of Pokemon X and Y occur, and they are reunited. Though the story of Infinity Energy lives on. Unexplored wars and battles have occurred between the lines of what we have talked about, so we will briefly explore those and recap a little bit. Devon Corp had revived Infinity Energy, specifically even using the same technology as the ultimate weapon to harness that as a research the event, and to weaken Rayquaza so the Pokemon League could study it, stealing its life and even killing Zinnia's close friend and the original lore keeper, Aster. Jesus!
Infinity energy is also sought after by other corporations to counter Devencorp. Lysandre became a massive corporation to assist the world, but also became lost in his ancestors' work, becoming twisted in time. N would be used by Getsis, with N being a descendant of AZ and Getsis being a descendant of one of the old heroes of Unova, though only N could be the next hero of Unova, or at least one of them, as he inherits the title. As we look at others within the Pokemon world, other antagonists, even Archie and Maxie had their own ties to this strange sense of eternal life. A file they have that you can read is Project Azoth. The goal is to return the world, return everything to the beginning. In order to further the project, we must proceed with research on Groudon and Kyogre's primal reversion. They wanted to return the world to zero, the true beginning. This fits in perfectly with Alchemic Azoth, which is the final goal in alchemy to some researchers. For humans to become immortal, they must return to their endemic being, the form they were in the beginning, how they were in the Garden of Eden. We find the greed of power and immortality within these regions and within our villains. Archie and Maxie wanted to return the world to its beginnings, how pristine it was, and potentially even find immortality through primal power. Even though we didn't discuss it here because of its separation from the Great War, Cyrus wished the same, to create a world anew through controlling the gods of time, space, and antimatter, the Pokemon of myth that could lead him to creating a new universe and leading him to Arceus. Getsis wanted to rule the world no matter how cruel he had to be. He desired it. And if he could resurrect the original dragon, he could reach immortality through the idea of a philosopher's stone. Lysandre wanted to use the power of infinity energy directly, revive the ultimate weapon, and take the lives of many in order to preserve the world in its beauty that he saw in the moment, granting immortal life to those that would survive. The Aether Foundation created the RKS system to mimic the power of Arceus and harness God's powers as mortal beings throughout the multiverse. Chairman Rose aimed to reach a new form of infinite energy through Eternamax, rewriting history in their favor after the failures and struggles of their past that they had escaped from since the original Darkest Day. And Paldea kind of keeps to itself, really, and Giovanni, just a classic villain going after the world and multiversal domination when he created Team Rainbow Rocket. Mind you, all of the villains in Rainbow Rocket succeeded in their missions in their dimensions, which is a haunting, very, very haunting concept, but we'll save that for another day. Because the world of Pokemon and the power of infinity energy has shaped the world since the beginning, and will continue to shape the world until the very end, from A to Z. And with that, that is the conclusion of the Great War and the buried history of it. Thank you so much for watching. Once again, if you would like to support the channel, subscribe, share this video with others, watch the other videos on the channel, and even go as far as becoming a member for $3 a month. It means the world and ensures that I can deep dive and take all the time needed to make sure I create quality videos for you, as I love doing this. Thank you to all of our members that you are seeing on screen. And up next, I am going to cover the Sinnoh Ecology. Go watch the Ecology series if you haven't. If you loved the descriptions that I had here, I have quite a few in there, and it's so much fun. So, with that then, as always, thank you so much for watching. Don't do anything I want to do. Don't do anything I want to do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I'll see you next time. Bye!